And so we begin with one of the comedies. The story of As You Like It.
During the time that France was divided into dukedoms, there reigned in one of these a usurper, who had deposed and banished his elder brother, the lawful duke. The lawful duke, driven from his rightful dominions, retired with a few faithful followers to the forest of Arden, and here they lived, like the old Robin Hood of England. When the cold winds of winter made the duke feel the change of his adverse fortune, he would endure it patiently, saying, "These chilling winds that blow upon my body are not so unkind as man's ingratitude. They do not flatter me, but represent truly to me my condition." And in this manner did the patient duke draw a useful moral from everything he saw, and in his exiled life, remote from public haunts, he could find tongues in the trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything.
The banished duke had an only daughter, Rosalind, whom the usurper still retained in his court as a companion for his own daughter, Celia. Celia tried by every means in her power to make amends to Rosalind for the injustice of her own father in deposing the father of Rosalind. Now one day, a messenger came to tell them of a wrestling match which was about to begin, and Celia, thinking it would amuse Rosalind, agreed to go and see it. However, they found it was likely to prove a tragical sight, for a large and powerful wrestler was taking on a young man of extreme youth and inexperience in the art, and the beholders were all fearful he would be killed. When the Duke saw Celia and Rosalind, he said,
"How now, daughter and niece, are you crept hither to see the wrestling? You will take little delight in it. There is such odds in the men. In pity to this young man, I would wish to persuade him from the match. Speak to him, ladies, and see if you can move him."
This they did. Celia entreated the young stranger to desist from the attempt, and Rosalind spoke with such passionate feeling for the danger he was about to undergo, that instead of being persuaded to forego his purpose, all his thoughts were bent to distinguish himself by his courage in this lovely lady's eyes. He said,
"I'm sorry to deny such fair and excellent ladies anything. But if I am killed, there is one dead that is willing to die. I shall do my friends no wrong, for I have none to lament me. The world no injury, for in it I have nothing."
Rosalind was deeply moved by his words, finding in his friendless state something akin to her own. Indeed, she might almost be said at that moment to have fallen in love with him.
The kindness shown this youth by the noble ladies gave him such courage and strength, he performed wonders, and completely conquered his antagonist. The Duke Frederick, impressed by the courage and skill of the stranger, desired to know his name and parentage. The stranger said that his name was Orlando, and that he was the youngest son of Sir Rowland de Boys. Now Sir Rowland had been dead some years, but when he was living, he was the dearest and most loyal friend of the banished Duke. On hearing the name of Sir Rowland de Boys, all Duke Frederick's liking for the brave young man turned to displeasure.
But Rosalind was delighted, saying to Celia, "My father loved Sir Rowland de Boys, and if I had known this young man was his son, I should have added tears to my entreaties for his safety." Then, taking a chain from her neck, she gave it to Orlando with the words, "Wear this for me. I am out of suits with fortune, or I would have given you a more valuable present."
Now Duke Frederick, in his anger at being reminded of the banished Duke, ordered Rosalind to instantly leave the palace and follow her father into exile. Celia, in dismay, pleaded with her father to relent and let her stay, but he refused to change his mind, saying, "She is too subtle for thee. Her smoothness, her very silence, speak to the people, and they do pity her. You are a fool to plead for her, for you will seem more bright and virtuous when she is gone. Therefore open not your lips in her favour, for the doom which I have passed upon her is irrevocable."
When Celia found she could not prevail upon her father to let Rosalind remain with her, she decided to accompany her into exile. They resolved to leave the palace that night and go in search of Rosalind's father, the banished duke, in the forest of Arden. Celia considered it would be unsafe for two young ladies to travel in rich clothes, so it was decided that Rosalind, the tallest, should wear the dress of a country lad and take the name of Ganymede. Celia was habited like a country lass, and as Ganymede's sister, chose the name of Aliena. When at last they came to the forest of Arden, they were in great need of food and rest, so Ganymede accosted a countryman, speaking with manly boldness. "Shepherd, if love or gold can in this desert place procure us entertainment, I pray you bring us to where we may rest ourselves, for this young maid, my sister, is much fatigued with travelling and faints for want of food." The shepherd led them to a neat cottage, well supplied with provisions, and they agreed to stay in this abode until they could learn in which part of the forest the banished duke dwelt.
Leaving Ganymede and Aliena happily settled, we returned to the young gallant Orlando. When his father, Sir Rowland de Boys, died, he had left the young Orlando in the care of his elder brother, Oliver. But Oliver cruelly neglected the young boy. However, Orlando so much resembled his excellent father that without any advantage of education, he seemed like a youth who had been bred with the utmost care. Oliver was jealous, and so envied the fine and dignified person of his brother, he wished to destroy him. And it was he who had set up the wrestling match in which he hoped his brother would be killed. Contrary to his wicked hopes, his brother proved victorious, and Oliver's envy and malice knew no bounds, and he swore he would burn the bedchamber where Orlando slept. He was overheard making these plans by an old and faithful servant named Adam. Now when Adam heard the peril his young master was in, he set out to warn him, for he loved Orlando because he resembled Sir Rowland. The faithful servant and his master then decided to set out for the forest of Arden, where they found themselves in the same state as Ganymede and Aliena had been, almost spent with hunger and fatigue. Orlando, desperate to find food for the servant who had saved his life, happened to arrive at that part of the forest where the banished duke was, and where he and his friends were about to eat their dinner. Orlando explained his plight, and the duke insisted that he fetch the old servant, and that they both join him at dinner. When the duke found out that Orlando was the son of his old friend Sir Rowland de Boys, he took Orlando and Adam under his protection, and they stayed with him in his court in the forest.
Ganymede and Aliena, happily settled in their cottage, were strangely surprised to find the name of Rosalind carved on all the trees, and love sonnets fastened to them, all addressed to Rosalind. While they were wondering how this could be, they met Orlando, who still wore the chain that Rosalind had given him about his neck. Orlando little thought that the shepherd boy Ganymede was the fair Princess Rosalind who had so won his heart, but finding the youth so charming, entered into conversation with him. Ganymede then asked Orlando if he was a certain lover who haunts our forest and spoils our young trees with carving Rosalind upon their barks, all praising the same Rosalind. And Ganymede added, "If I could find this lover, I would give him good counsel that would soon cure him of this love." Orlando confessed that indeed he was the lover, and asked how the youth could possibly cure him. Ganymede proposed that he, Ganymede, should pretend to be Rosalind, and that Orlando should pay court as if he indeed were Rosalind. It would then be Ganymede's part to imitate the fantastic ways of whimsical ladies to their lovers, till Orlando became ashamed of his passion. And so it was. And although Orlando thought all this but sportive play, never suspecting that Ganymede was Rosalind, it gave him the opportunity to say all the fond things in his heart. And Ganymede enjoyed the secret jest in knowing these fine speeches were actually being addressed to the right person.
But all good tales must have a resolution, and this is how it came about. One morning, as Orlando was going to visit Ganymede, he saw a man lying asleep on the ground, with a large green snake twisted about his neck. The snake, seeing Orlando, glided away. But then he discovered a lioness crouching nearby, waiting for the sleeping man to wake. As Orlando glanced at the man, he realized it was his brother Oliver, who had so cruelly used him, and he was almost tempted to leave him a prey to the lioness. But brotherly affection and the gentleness of his nature overcame his anger, and he drew his sword and attacked the lioness and slew her, but not before she had torn one of his arms with her sharp claws. While Orlando was engaged with the lioness, Oliver awoke, and perceiving that his brother, whom he had so cruelly treated, was saving his life at the risk of his own, was overcome with shame and remorse. He begged his brother's pardon for his past conduct. Orlando rejoiced at this turn of events, and readily forgave him. But the wound in his arm had left him so weak, he desired that his brother should go to Ganymede's cottage and tell of the accident that had befallen him. Oliver went to the cottage, and told Aliena and Ganymede the whole tale of Orlando's bravery, of his own guilt for having cruelly used his brother, and of the happy reconciliation.
Aliena, on hearing such an expression of sincere sorrow from Oliver, immediately fell in love with him. But Ganymede, on hearing the danger her beloved Orlando had been in, forgot her man's attire and immediately fell into a swoon. Oliver now resolved to marry Aliena, live the simple life of a shepherd, and settle his estate and house upon Orlando. Orlando was delighted with the news of his brother's love for Aliena, but added sadly how much he wished he could be married on the same day to his Rosalind. Ganymede now saw it was time to end the charade. He told Orlando that if he really loved Rosalind, as well as he professed to do, then his wish would be granted. Rosalind would appear in person, and he could be married at the same time as his brother. The fond lover Orlando, half believing and half doubting this, asked Ganymede if he spoke in sober meaning. To his amazement, Ganymede replied, "By my life I do. Therefore put on your best clothes and bid the Duke and his friends to your wedding on the morrow."
So it was that on the following day, as if by magic, Rosalind and Celia came before the Duke wearing their own clothes. Rosalind begged a blessing of her father, and then told him all the story of their banishment. The Duke, overjoyed by these events, willingly gave consent to the marriages of Orlando and Oliver. Although their weddings could not be celebrated with the splendour due for such an important occasion, yet a happier wedding day was never passed.
Meanwhile, the usurper Duke, enraged at the flight of his daughter Celia, put himself at the head of a large force, intending to march on the forest and put his brother and all his followers to the sword. But as he entered the forest, he was met by an old religious hermit who completely turned the usurper's heart from his wicked design. He became a true penitent and resolved to spend the rest of his days in a religious house. This joyful news, as unexpected as it was welcome, came opportunely to heighten the festivity and rejoicings of the princesses on their wedding day.
The Duke had now an opportunity of rewarding those true friends who had stayed with him in his banishment, and these worthy followers were well pleased to return in peace and prosperity to the palace of their lawful Duke. Thus all ended happily.